Hey everyone, it's Joe Lyons here in Dallas, Texas.
Yeah, and Jackie here from Copenhagen, Denmark.
So we were just talking about the interesting relationship of as you develop a script, when you start off and you don't do too much, that the coding is simple, right? And yet often, which this one we hadn't discussed, Jackie, is out of a process. If you're automate, if there was everything from the beginning to the end, and you can automate pretty quickly, I guess that we should say the time it takes you to do that. Sometimes the time savings that you'll in the savings you'll have as a human can you can save a lot of time with just programming a little, right? But that's where we started saying, like, well, wait a minute, if your boss says, well, that's great, can I do this and can I do this and can I do this, the answer is yes. Right? But the amount of programming that you have to build in to do that, or to handle error handling, all this other stuff, right? That's where it really starts to get to be
Yeah,
tedious.
yeah, and I had a single example of having something fairly large data set that one wants to display in a fairly simple graphical way. That's okay. It's in Excel. You can use a pivot table and then a graph, and you can select the entire data range and do some filters, do some rows and columns and stuff like that, and get a nice looking graph going within, I don't know how much time I used on it the first time, a few minutes perhaps,
Mm-hmm.
because I knew what I wanted and where I wanted to end. And I was like, this is fairly simple. It's built into the tool. Let me present that to the middleman, so to speak. It wasn't for her, but she could review it and kind of give feedback on if she believed that would be good enough for the guy who needed it. And within a few steps, she was like, "No, I think this is too complex. Um, I know that you can make me a GUI where I just point at the data set and then I get the nice graph thingy. Couldn't you make that instead?" And then we remove these a bit complex steps that I don't really understand and I'm unsure of. And I'm like, yeah, we can do that, but this is built into Excel. And if you looked, I clicked on two buttons and I selected a template and then pointed at those three data points. That's what you need to learn. Those are the 9 steps that this really involves. But yeah, I can program something and it will be something that just lies on top of that functionality.
Right.
It
Yeah,
will
the
be
irony. Yeah.
utilizing exactly those
Yeah.
steps within Excel. Um, so it will simplify it for the user, and I'll be using extra time on doing it. And in the end, I will probably be the only one able to fix it or review it or
Yeah.
change it or whatever. So let's say I want to do something else at one point. They'll end up having something that within an Excel update or whatever
Right.
would stop working, and they wouldn't know the inner workings of it. Instead of the guy learning the 9 steps and everything's fine. I love making automation happen, and I'm happy to do it where it makes a lot of sense. But here, where I'm just actually layering complexity on top of something fairly simple, it's it becomes even simpler for the guy. And I think it happens a lot, this with removing those in middle steps so that it seems very, very simple. But in the end, mm, who's able to fix it if it has a fault or if something changes?
Right.
I'm like, okay, so let's say the data that we get from the system changes, gets 2 extra rows, or no, not rows, but maybe columns, or gets an extra thing that needs to be filtered on, I would need to change the automation code. Whereas with just making the simple pivot table, you would have the option of adding that extra filter, or which you can do when I've automated that process as easily.
Right.
I
Yeah.
could do it, but if I need to do that in 2 years, I'll need to reread all of my code and familiarize myself with why we did whatever we did, and then I can make it. But if I'm not there, they'll just scrap the idea, and nobody in the company will go back to that, and they'll probably not present that data in a nice graphical way anymore. Who knows what will happen, right? But it's just that general idea of adding complexity where it's not needed to simplify something that's fairly simple already. That's where it doesn't make sense to me
Now,
always.
let me ask you this: could you have considered, and maybe you could probably even answer for them and say no, that wouldn't work. But what if you just built in a couple message boxes on the steps that would pop up and say, go, so telling them exactly what to do? Like, would that might have been an aid that might have helped? You know what I mean? Where it's like, oh, it's reminding me right here, do this. I can do that, right?
You could probably do that and it would be okay. But here, the idea is I want a pop-up, let's say a GUI, that says select a file.
Yeah.
Then they select a file, they will open a Windows file selector, and they'll point at the one they just got from the interface that they just exported. And then it will present them with a finished graph. And that's what they want. That's how simple they want it to be.
Gotcha.
And I understand that then they only take 4 steps, whereas if they already have done the export and have the file, going into, and this is just this one task, but going into this file, clicking select all on Excel, and going to the insert tab and clicking pivot table, you're almost there.
Right. Yeah.
Then knowing, because you've done it before, the 3 things, the filter, the row, and the column, those 3, and then selecting the graph you want to see. And then it's done. And you could have it even simpler and put it in at another time, where you just have the pivot table, you have the graph selected, you just have the data on another tab, and you just replace that data with the new. That is even simpler, and even that was a bit over the top, because I've kind of made them accustomed to just have simple thing. And I've done it a couple of times now, where they have that for all kinds of data things they export, and then they get that. And so now they just want to click those one button and select the file and then have it, right? It's nice, sure, and I'm happy to do it. It it utilizes and gives me room for making other stuff, sure. But yeah, it's just, here I was just kind of hit by it being so simple that me coding it would add complexity to it.
Well, besides the amount of time for you to do it, and then, like you said, then also something might break, and they're stuck on you, versus the other way. Like, what can go wrong, right? It's not not much.
Yeah, because the one who's going to utilize the program I make, it doesn't seem more complex to him. It seems much more simple. But when I'm trying to be the company's man, so to speak, I'm doing something for the company that instead their employees probably should be able to do, without me putting some kind of middle wrapper around something very simple. just here in this case, I'm not for the automation part of it. If it included getting the stuff from whatever system down, and it was on a schedule, and it just send out an email to the guy with the graph in it and stuff like that, where you have more steps, then, but here you have the Excel file ready with all the data, and you just need to create the pivot table, and then you have it the way you want it. It doesn't have enough steps for me to really almost start up the code editor, right? It takes almost longer than loading Excel, right. But yeah.
All right. Well, that was I think a fun little chat of, do your best to work with people to explain, is it really smart to, program some of these steps. Sometimes you might want to leave it where a human can interact with it, and hopefully they don't push back that like, no, I don't want to deal with it at all. I mean, now correct me if I'm wrong, Jackie. If they were doing this 100 times a day, you'd probably change your opinion, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the thing. This is maybe a once a month thing.
Yeah.
Who knows? Right. But something like that. And sure, and I even removed the need to select a file if then it would just take the newest one or whatever it might be, right?
I was going to say, if you can, maybe they have an API, you can even go get the darn data, right? And
yeah, and that's also one of the things that I've contemplated. If they wanted it at a regular schedule, you could build stuff like that into it. And but yeah, at the moment it's a first step. But yeah, it wasn't really simplifying it for the company, only for this one employee, right? That's where it's kind of it feels wrong.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's a really interesting thing to think about when you're doing it. Is might you be for yourself be doing yourself a disfavor, creating more work for yourself, which again you got to talk to your boss and see what they want, right? What is your job? And if I know in yours often you have a job, it's not that they're having you do this stuff on the side and this and that. And yeah, it does seem like you wouldn't want to be pushing that.
No, and again, I'm happy, and I like making AutoHotkey GUIs, sure. And I like giving people something that's even simpler, but I don't like putting I keep saying complexity, but I know that I'm simplifying it for the guy. But what about if that guy over there wants something almost similar, and none of them have learned to use pivot tables, which would be a much better way of utilizing their time instead of then explaining to me what they want.
Right.
If they just learned how to create a pivot table and utilizing that in Excel, that would perhaps be better in this case.
No,
I'm not
that's
saying
a good
it's
point.
always like that. But
yeah, it's. I think maybe your point more is they're locking it down to a very specific thing and losing the flexibility, right? And that's where you're like, wait a minute here, and because it's just a couple steps, right? It's not a terrible thing. So to have that still flexibility there, that is a really, a wonderful thing. And even then, maybe by doing that, they will start picking up learning pivot tables and realize they can do them in other ways, versus if you skip past that whole process, they'll never, to your point, right? They'll never learn it. They'll come to you again and say, now make one for this, now make one for that.
Exactly. Microsoft have built an amazing tool that's automating all kinds of stuff for them in Excel, the pivot table, right? It's like putting AutoHotkey on top of that, just to not need to select those 3 indicators. It just seems like it's not lazy or anything like that. That's not what I mean, but it becomes too whatever. I'm not sure. Yeah.
I hear you. All right, man. Well, it's good talking.
Yeah. Absolutely, Joe.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye.